Welcome to Attention Retention with Jackie McManis, your source for the latest trends in transportation recruitment and retention.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Attention Retention. I'm your host, Jackie McManis, CEO and founder of KJ Media, a recruitment advertising agency specializing in this space. Joining us today is Robert Pierson, the Vice President of Driver Recruiting at Mesilla Valley Transportation. Robert, thank you so much for joining me today.
Jackie, excited to be on with you and talking shop. We got a lot to discuss in a short time to get there, so let's do it.
Yeah, let's roll right in. You and I have known each other for several years. We joked last week that we were chatting on the phone, and last I think we connected, it was pre-COVID, and a lot has changed. A lot has really just transformed our industry over the last couple of years, and I'm excited to have you on and give value to our listeners. But before we dive into the 3 R's, recruitment, retention, and recognition, could you share a little about yourself and your journey in becoming the Vice President of Driver Recruiting?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of my family's been in trucking most of my life. My grandfather actually joked with me when I was 16, and he was teaching me how to drive a beat-up Geo Metro, and I'm grinding gears. He goes, "You're going to grow up to be a recruiter." I didn't realize that was actually an insult at the time, but it turns out he was not wrong. So in January of 2006, I recruited my first driver into a job with a small carrier out of Oklahoma. I've worked with 6 carriers now at this point, consulted for 32, and got about a few months ago, I would have hired my 27,000th driver. With that said, it's a lot of fun. I have one of the best jobs in the world. And if I do my job correctly, my best conversation is telling somebody you're hired and you're going to be better off for it. So I'm thankful for what I do. Anybody that can get into this line of work, there's short days, there's long days. But at the end of the day, at the end of the week, what you do is important to our industry. And if you do it well, is important to the people that you ultimately place in a better line of work.
Can we say that one more time? What was that number? 27,000 driver?
Yeah, 27,000.
Wow. Bravo to that. So as we are really navigating through the challenges of the trucking industry, let's dive into the heart of the conversation. And I want to kick it off with recruiting. What are the primary obstacles that you're encountering when recruiting qualified truck drivers in today's market?
I think the issue that we're seeing specifically right now, more so than anything else, is there are definitely a lot of applicants available. Yeah. The issue gets into quality, and quality varies from one carrier to the next. One man's trash is another man's treasure sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's really finding that right person in the right job in the right location. And there's challenges that come with that. Part of it is being detailed and understanding I may have to talk to 50 people before I get to that person that's the right fit. The driver goes through that same experience, so you have to keep that in mind. Your struggle is the driver's struggle as well. So when that driver is going through having conversation after conversation, it can be a challenge. So as a recruiter, it's not just you have the right number of tickets or accidents or number of jobs, but for the driver, what are you looking for? What matters to you? Identifying if I have that in my toolbox or I don't become really important. So that's the challenge at this moment, where we have limited trucks. We've lived in a world where we hire to infinity. At this moment, the trucks I have open next week are literally because we had some people leave the company and I have 10 trucks I need to fill. And that offers a unique challenge to recruiters that had been poked with a cattle prong of hire. Well, okay, now I have 90 candidates, and all those candidates meet the minimum hiring standards. Mm-hmm. How do I select the 10 and identify, we'd like you to join the team? And it's that difference between recruiting and capacity development. Recruiting is, I'm trying to place a position. I'm trying to get somebody into a truck and get it off the fence. Capacity development gets into that conversation of, let's utilize where we are at and talk about where we want to be as a fleet 12 months from now. That is a different mindset for most recruiters that have been in this industry, in particular 10 plus years, because they've not been in that position before. So that's what we're taking on at this moment. And we're not the only carrier in that position, but it also adds new dynamic for the driver, because the driver has not been in that position either.
I think that's a really excellent point, especially with this softer freight market. Companies are really taking the time to address the drivers that they're bringing on board versus the hire, 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 and let's get as many butts in the seats as possible. Where now it's, let's make sure it's a right fit for our company. Let's make sure it's a right cultural fit for the driver and then for us. And so I'm seeing that companies are really able to take that time over the last year specifically. And it's projected to go on for the next couple of years as well, or a couple of months. But with that being said, how do you, and what do you find as being the most successful in attracting and recruiting top drivers right now? What methods?
When it comes to the job, I'm going to say it's schedule. Obviously, every individual wants to make more money. That's not unique to a driver. Drivers often, though, right now, the biggest selling point that you can have if you're not going to pay a ton of money, which if you're in this current freight environment, I don't see there being that push. Salaries are holding steady. We'll get into that arms race next year. But right now, what it seems that it is most drivers want set schedule. And so it's identifying the fact, is it a Monday through Friday? Is it one where you have to work weekends? But that seems to be the biggest motivator for most drivers at this moment. I think drivers have accepted, there's still the exception that I'm not going to be a dry van driver, not touching freight, and get paid 80 cents a mile. That doesn't exist. Those companies have either gone out of business or quite frankly, went through the unfortunate task of doing layoffs. So if you can come into it with schedules, that's very appealing to people. The other part of this, though, drivers are very concerned about the bottom falling out and having that bad week. And that gets into that conversation of that schedule and consistency and being able to say, hey, you're going to make this every single week. So if it's not a guaranteed minimum, having that discussion about what a good week looks like, and now let's talk about what a bad week looks like. Being able to identify that and have that conversation becomes really, really important. It requires the recruiters to be able to have that level of intellectual discussion with a driver. But if we can pull that off, we're going to be much better off because we are going to come out of this. It might be 3 months. It might be 12 months from now. I don't have the crystal ball. But if you do it correctly now, those pains will not hurt you like they will next year. Because if you don't, you're going to be right back where you started from, and you're going to be going back to the recruiters, hey, just hire, 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 which is not a healthy place to be.
No. And, the cost of doing business is going up across the board. The cost of advertising, where I sit, right now we're finding it to be a lower cost per hire, lower cost per candidate because the market's not as competitive. A lot of companies decided to, pause their budget or reduce their budget across the board. But, what we're finding too is this is a great time for these recruiters to really explain and work on their techniques for when the market swings back. And I absolutely loved what you said, talking, and training. This stems from the top at the company, right? Training the companies and training the recruiters to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that's huge point because many companies will just, hey, our average is, $90,000 a year. Everything's perfect, butterflies and sunny skies. And we all know that's not the truth. We're in trucking. There's issues that happen on the hour, by the minute, right? And so having that transparent conversation with the recruiters always sets that company up for success. They're going to know what to expect, and really setting that relationship. And you and I want to circle back to this. Before we started this podcast, you and I were talking about transactional versus relationship in building communication between the recruiter and the driver. Can you talk about that again a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, it's important to have empathy, and it's important to understand specifically why a driver wants a certain thing. Sometimes it revolves around money, but it could revolve around 50 different items. That recruiter being able to have that detailed discussion, though, becomes really important. I'll give you an example. If I have a driver based in Houston, right now, your average local trucking job in Houston that requires no freight touching, no endorsements, and is home daily, right now averages about $20 an hour. If the driver in Houston has a TWIC card and works specifically in and out of the ports, that average position pays $35 an hour. So somebody that's novice and just knows those facts would say, well, why in the world would a guy not get his TWIC card and just go running into the ports? That's where, as a recruiter, you have that discussion of understanding what that driver's needs are, what their concerns are. Maybe it's an annoyance and they don't want to deal with the ports and they just can't stand it. Maybe there's something in their background that they don't have a horrible background, but they can't obtain the TWIC card. On face value, if you just quickly look at a piece of paper, you'll go, okay, one guy's a lemon. He's lemming here. He's taking $15 less. This guy's a worse driver. You don't know that. You're making assumptions. You need to have the conversation with the driver, get involved with it, and go, hey, what's important to you? What's not important to you? That will tell you a whole lot of things, because if you make assumptions, you're ultimately dismissing opportunities. It's why when a driver tells me, I don't like that, I'm going to ask the follow-up. That's not a rejection. That's the follow-up question of, what don't you like about it? It may be that there's no getting that person. That person doesn't like the position. I'm not going to be able to talk them into it. Or it may be a situation that we just need to be speaking the same language and we're not talking the same thing. That recruiter building that rapport and that relationship starts to separate just, oh, I don't want it, don't want it, don't want it. And in this environment, that's the thing we have to fight. A lot of recruiters will quickly look at an application, go next, 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 and they end up missing out on a ton of opportunities because they didn't have the conversation. They made assumptions. It's the things that we have to be real careful right now, and I'm seeing that in a few carriers. There's some of us that are starting to get fat and lazy. The big thing on our end is we have to stay hungry, and we still have to pretend, hey, this is just like it was 2 years ago. Talk to everybody. Have that conversation. And don't let it be an assembly line. Every conversation is going to be unique based off of what the driver's unique wants and needs are.
I think that is spot on, especially figuring out what works for them, what are they looking for, and maybe why they don't have that TWIC card. What they could hate going into the ports. Everyone's very unique, and we're in a business of humans, right? Everyone has their own DNA, their own personality trait, their own way of what they like, dislike about the job itself. And so for recruiters, and we always encourage our clients, and that's why we have a focus on pre-qualifying the candidates before they even go to the recruiter's desk, versus looking at, it's so easy to apply in today's market over the years. I mean, if you look at some of these bigger job boards, I won't mention names, but it's one click apply, right? Or you have these multi-carrier apps, and it's these auto match, and the driver doesn't even know that they were, their information was given to them, right? To these carriers. But when we look at, okay, we want to focus on drivers that are actually interested in your position, pre-qualifying them as much as possible. So instead of the recruiter getting 100 leads in one day, maybe they're getting 35 to 40, but these folks are more high intent, they have quality, and what that's going to do is let the recruiter have time. And that's what it comes down to, I think, Robert, is that time to be able to have these good conversations. And, like we were saying earlier, and I want to share this with the audience, it's okay if a driver isn't the right fit for your company. That's okay. Let them know. Say, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. If you have anyone, friends, family, refer us out. I'm actually going to refer you over to my buddy at ABC Trucking, because I think you'd be a great fit there. We are in the relationship business, and it's small, but it's large at the same time. Drivers talk. We all know that. And folks want to hear from other drivers why they should join a company. So always have that positive engagement. And I don't know about you, but what are your thoughts on I guess I'd be curious in your viewpoint on scripts, recruiter scripts. There's been a lot of talk about that recently, and I'd love to get your feedback on that.
I go with bullet points. We don't lay out a full script. The problem is when you contain a conversation, you end up having the recruiter talking way too much. In an ideal conversation, in particular, that very first phone call, the candidate I'm talking with should be talking about 70% of the time. I don't want to do most of the talking. This is one of those times where I'm really big about the concept of just shut up and listen. The driver's going to tell you, if you ask the right questions, you're guiding the conversation, but that driver's giving you the answers to the test, so to speak. And so I don't go off of a script. I have bullet points. But a basic conversation is literally qualify, sell, and close. And what I mean by qualify is not do you have tickets or accidents, but I'll come right out and tell a driver, hey, why don't you qualify me and I'll qualify you, and let's see if we're a match here together. Drivers will generally respond well to it because they like the concept of them controlling the conversation, and kind of like a game of 20 questions or a game of Clue, we're just going back and forth.
Yes.
When you go into what I call the sales part of the call, you're still sticking to what the driver has said. So if the driver's saying, you know, my big issue is home time, but I got to make at least $1,500 a week, and I really want to stick to the southern U.S. When I go into the sales part of it, I'm going to talk about our running lanes. I'm going to talk about what the average weekly pay is, both a good week and a bad week. And I'm going to talk about the other facts that the driver specifically brought up. So when I go to the close part of that conversation, I'm probably going to talk about A, B, and C. And then I go into the call, well, Mr. Driver, we liked A, we liked B. We had some contention on C, but I think we're on the same page. Is this where you'd like to move forward? Now, the driver may say no, and that's fine. I go back to the sales part and the qualification part of the call. But I'm really doing it more off of a script because there's a few things that are wild cards in that discussion that could take place. The driver may ask a question that the recruiter doesn't know, as an example. That's not the end of the world. I don't want the recruiter making up an answer. I want that recruiter to go, hey, Mr. Driver, I don't have the answer to that, but if you give me 5 minutes, I'll get the answer and I will call you right back. That opportunity. So it's not a perfect script. If you try to set up a recruiter as a script, quite frankly, for lack of a better term, they come off as phony. You do not need somebody who's chatty, but you need somebody that can carry a conversation with a complete and utter stranger. And if they can do that, they shouldn't need a script. I can tell you, I looked at this about 4 months ago. We had a week where we hired 52 drivers. And in that week that we hired 52 drivers, one of the cool things with our phone system is we can see the agent, in this case the recruiter, and the caller, in this point the driver, who's talking. Of those 52 hires, that very first phone call, 48 of those hires in that first conversation, the driver did at least 70% of the talking. Meaning that the positive reinforcement is that driver is the person leading the conversation.
That is a fantastic stat. And that's what you want, right? And if you think about it, the recruiting profession, it is similar to sales in so many ways. And, you know, typically when you're training salespeople, and I know I went through my series of training in my little lifetime, but it is very much qualifying each other to make sure it's a right fit. You don't want to, you know, push a square into a round hole. Ends up with retention, bad taste in mouth, and taking that time from the beginning to really truly understand what's most important to the driver and seeing if that is an actual fit, you know, and the honesty is the best policy because that goes such a long way. And you mentioned orientation, and congratulations on hiring 52 drivers in 1 week. That is like a round of applause. If you had an audience right now, they'd be cheering. That is definitely very impressive. But I would love to get your opinions around getting drivers to show up to orientation. A big piece, you know, carriers were like, I got ghosted. I had 50 scheduled, but only 15 showed up. And I'd love for you to talk more about getting drivers to show up to orientation.
Yeah, we had, it was part of it. I joined Mesilla back in May of 21. And our average show rate at that point was about 64%, which is extremely inefficient. There were a couple things that we looked at. Part of it got into how we compensated for orientation was a bit of the issue because time is money. So we initiated something at the time that we had literally what we call a quick hire bonus. And what that quick hire bonus was, if the driver committed to the orientation and showed up the day they committed to, they got paid significantly more for orientation because you want to positively reward people for living up to expectations. And as a driver, your value proposition is I show up when I say I'm going to. Now, it didn't mean that we wouldn't reschedule or that we wouldn't, hey, family emergency came up, we'll see you the following week. But what it allowed us to do there is reward the person right off the bat that says, I'm going to show up on this date, and they showed up, which tends to be positive reinforcement leading into their early stages of employment. I'm not a believer in a sign-on bonus. Never have been. I think they're a gimmick. But when you actually deliver and follow through, you should get rewarded for that. The other part of that, though, beyond that, got into the discussion of recruiter training. As a recruiter, that driver is buying into me. They don't buy into MVT until about 90 days into their employment. They learn about their dispatcher. Honestly, that early relationship until orientation, their only tie into the company is me. So my conversation with the recruiters in those early days was, look, the drivers are telling you they don't like you. You should take it personally. They are literally telling you when they go MIA, they aren't a fan of yours. That's something you should take personally. Now, the nice thing is it's fixable. In a few cases, it was a recruiter that was too authoritative on the phone. In another case, it was a recruiter that was really just running an assembly line at their desk. And so it let the chips fall where they may. There's some art to this, but the fact of the matter is I'm selling them on me as much as I am the company. And if I do that correctly, if I take the time to have the conversation, things will generally work out. You'll always have the exception. You have the professional drivers out there that will tell you that their wife died the day before orientation. Ironically, the wife has died 5 other locations.
Absolutely. That's on dance.
Yep, it happens. It happens. With that said, though, statistically, over the course of several weeks, you'll start seeing a body of work. Our show rate now ranges about 92% over the last quarter. The dynamic has changed with our current environment. So as an example, if you show me, I can't hire you for the next year because I literally, when you're scheduled for orientation, I am committing you to a truck. There is no spare trucks on that standpoint. But with that said, if you take the time, you have the conversation, and one of the things that we do that's a little bit unique compared to our competitors is a lot of our competitors will do kind of a conditional offer letter in orientation, like where the fleet manager sits down with them or some variation. We don't do that. We do that the Friday before orientation, where the recruiter physically will tell the driver, everything that I've told you, I'm going to go over with you, and it's going to be in writing. So if it's the miles, if it's the pay, if it's the equipment, and that sounds like a nuisance, and some recruiters view that step as a nuisance. It is an invaluable moment in the relationship building because it's not a hindrance to the job. It's closing out the sale of the job. The driver has it signed. A driver does not come to our orientation without that signed conditional offer letter. So that we can verify that has taken place, and it becomes really important. And from the driver's perspective, in a world where I joke that recruiter is Latin for liar, because a lot of drivers have that thing of I don't trust recruiters. Yep. When you can physically put it in writing and the recruiter and the driver signs on it, your show percentage goes up dramatically. And with technology now, it's not like you're having to fax this. It's a lot easier to do that now, too.
Absolutely. You use DocuSign. And let me ask you this, and I absolutely love that because we had some clients that started doing that versus the offer letter within orientation. Their show rates increase dramatically. And if you think about it, Robert, for any other position outside of the CDL driver position, office, admin, HR, as in-office staff, we're getting offer letters. I know when I bring on, staff members, I'm sending the offer letter before they show up. So why would that be different for a driver? And that is the perfect opportunity for them to review exactly what the offer is, what the next steps would be. And let me ask you this. Do the recruiters go over this offer letter with the drivers on the phone? Or is it something where they send it to them and they have questions, they reach back out?
Oh, no, it needs to be done on the phone. We want to talk through it. Yeah. The challenge is things can get lost in translation. And in all fairness, if I send you a conditional offer letter and there's something that's just worded differently, you can talk yourself out of that job. And so, and in all fairness to the drivers are fairly savvy, but your average driver talks to about 8.3 other recruiters when they're in the active job market on average, based off of what 10 Street shared with us. The challenge when that takes place is it's easy to confuse one job to the next. And I've had that before. I've had a driver show up to orientation and tell me, I am really excited about that Chicago to Buffalo dedicated run. And me going, I don't have a Buffalo to Chicago dedicated run. What are you talking about? The driver was applying to another company. And the fact is that's an indictment on me, that it got to that point and that driver showed up. Trust me, in front of the operations team, I felt about this small. It wasn't my best moment. It's the opportunity for the driver and the recruiter to physically talk, physically go over it, make sure they're on the same page. And if you don't do that, and you don't at least have, even if you don't do an official offer letter, if you don't have that synopsis conversation at the end of the thing, you're doing a disservice to the driver. You are setting that driver up to essentially just be a wild card, and what happens, happens.
Mm-hmm. No, that is well said. And I want to switch gears over to retention. Could you discuss any unique employee engagement programs or initiatives that have significantly contributed to retaining your workforce?
Yeah. So we specifically, when we look at the best 90 drivers, so I have a meeting coming up here in a couple hours with the operational team that we'll physically sit down and look at who we have scheduled for next week. Right now it's 96. I'm going to be able to take about 20 of them. So how we determine that, part of it goes into who we can retain and who's going to be a benefit to our company. So all those 96 meet our qualification standards, but it gets into, let's look at their work history. Let's go on a case-by-case basis. If this driver has 3 jobs in the last year, we need to somewhat justify why we'd move forward. Or at least ask that question, what about us would lead to a different result? It doesn't mean that we say no, but it means that we need to have that conversation. It gets into the discussion of, if a driver was terminated for late deliveries, we don't need somebody that's going to get fired 30 days in because they showed up late. And I honestly, my scorecard's not based off of the hires for the week. My scorecard is really based 6 to 12 months after that driver is fired, and they're still with us, which is an important thing, how you compensate your recruiters too. The other piece of that equation, though, is the recruiter stays in that driver life cycle for their first 6 months. The recruiter's not dispatching them. If the recruiter's dispatching them, something's gone wrong.
Yeah.
But that recruiter, as that first point of contact, that recruiter stays in contact with their driver, wants to know how things are going, create an extra opportunity to find out if something's wrong before a little thing develops into a big thing. And it does make a difference over the first parts of their employment period. Your highest turnover rate is always going to be that driver in the first 90 days of employment.
Yep. That's right.
But if you can cut that one single bucket in half, you will generally see a 20 to 30% drop in your overall retention rates on an annualized turnover. I can tell you, when we did that, at the time we got this initiative going with the recruiter getting more involved in their first 6 months, I want to say our total turnover was around 120%. Right now, I can tell you for the month of February, our annualized turnover would be at about 70%. So we're still working on ways to make it drop, but those are that key period is staying involved with the driver.
That's great. And that's very unique, as you know, Robert. Like most companies, they have that handoff and it goes to dispatch, and the recruiter really doesn't talk to the driver, barely really at that point. How do you leading the recruitment team, how do you set the recruiters up to manage their time? Because obviously they're recruiting in a bunch of drivers, let's say, 5 drivers turns to 10, and every week they're bringing on drivers. How do they manage their time to be able to bring in new candidates and new recruits, and then also maintain those relationships with current drivers?
I think the biggest part of this, though, is we have to be somewhat honest with people that we hire as recruiters. Mm-hmm. This is not a 9-to-5 job. This is not a Monday through Friday 9-to-5 job. This is not an administrative job. You're going to have calls to take place over the weekend. If a driver gets on a Greyhound and all of a sudden that Greyhound breaks down early at 3 a.m. on a Sunday night, you're probably going to be getting a phone call from somebody. If you treat this job as a Monday through Friday, arrive at 8, leave at 5, most of those recruiters are going to fail. They just are. They're not going to be successful, or they'll never reach their fullest potential. That doesn't mean that we should waste time and shouldn't value our personal life, But on the flip side of it, I'm going to always have that honest discussion. If you're a processor, this is a Monday through Friday job, 8 to 5. If you're a recruiter, this is a much more entrepreneurial endeavor that you're going for, and you're compensated as such for it. The other part of this equation, though, is understanding, and I've tried at every company, especially when I've consulted, is I've sat with a recruiter and I time out activities. And it feels weird to the recruiter is, why are you doing this? But I go, before I'm going to critique any type of job that you're doing, I need to be very realistic about what is your job. Why does it take so long? Why does a report take you 30 minutes, but this person 5 minutes? You have to understand those dynamics. So when it comes to it, your average recruiter on a day with us is probably doing about 2.5 hours a day of physical outbound calling. There's inbound calls that come in. Primarily the big sweet spot of the day still continues to be about 10 to 2 o'clock. We're impacted as a mountain time zone company. That's impacted a little bit, that ours starts a little earlier in the day. And then the other part of it is, as a recruiter that I work with, is you need to set aside 30 minutes of your day for administrative work. And it might be that you, just because you got an application does not mean you run the reports at this moment. You may run all your reports from 3 o'clock to 3:30. And that's going to vary from one recruiter to the next. But having an idea of, hey, before I leave, I'm going to take 30 minutes to do this instead of trying to do it throughout the day. Because none of us truly multitask. I like to brag that I do. But at the end of the day, you're taking attention from one activity and putting it on the other. Recognizing that fact and putting some structure around it can definitely help. Most of the recruiters, though, that if you go, hey, talk to me about recruiters that fail at the job. Yeah. Most of the recruiters that fail at the job, it's not a time management issue. It's more of an issue that they are not aggressive with their own hours. They may hold other people accountable, but there's a certain level of self-accountability that gets involved with this, that there is a reason why good recruiters are good and bad recruiters are bad. In that first 90 days, you want to train them and give them every resource possible. But at the end of the day, if a year into it, they're not succeeding, your first question is, do I give you the resources to be successful? If you appear to have the same resources as somebody that is successful, now it's on you. Let's identify why it's not happening. And it's normally not time management that's the issue.
No, absolutely. And there is in any position, recruiting, sales, right? There is you could give everyone all the tools in the world, but there has to be a self-motivation, a self, where they want to excel, they want to do better, they want, that drive. And the drive itself is something you can't teach. They have to have it. But I could say this, if people are around other people that are driven, they're more likely to be driven, right? So if you're in a recruiting room and you've got someone that's a high performer and someone with a low performer, I think I just read a stat actually through the Wall Street Journal. The middle of the tier person, if they were that high performer, they increase by about 20% matching them. If they're next to that low performer, they reduce productivity by 40%. That's how toxic it is. So for executives and folks like yourself in this space, taking that time to really see and look at what makes a recruiter good, what tools can I give them, and how do I, match that so that we're duplicating and we're making a lean, mean recruiting machine, if you will. And, kind of circling back to the tasks. Every time you switch tasks, we all want to be multitaskers, especially in today's environment, right? There's social media, there's all these push notifications that we're getting, phone calls, and it drops significantly. And so we always say to our clients and to their recruiters, block off the time. This is when you do admin. When you're in that flow too of talking to folks on the phone, stay in that flow and block off certain times of the day so that you can catch up on the, administrative paperwork, which we all know is not everyone's favorite, but it is necessary to build the company. Let's jump over to recognition. How does MVT cultivate a culture of appreciation with their team, with drivers and staff across the board?
Yeah. I will go with on the driver's side first. We are big on fuel economy. We are obsessive compulsive about it. And what I mean by that is, in a world that once you buy the equipment and you pick up the customers, there's only two ways you can save money. One's going to be on driver pay or one's going to be on fuel. Now, I don't see an environment where we're going to go, let's look at driver pay and save some bucks. I don't see that being a healthy recipe for us. So it comes to fuel. So in an industry where we average about 6.5 miles a gallon, MVT averages about 9.5 miles a gallon. The equipment goes into some of that, but the biggest factor is driver behavior on the road. We have a department that works with them. The fleet managers work with them. Our vendors on that side work with them. But the driver specifically is the biggest influence on that fuel economy. So what we do specifically is the driver, as an example, in a quarter that has the best fuel economy, we give them a brand new car. So last quarter, the person that won it ended up averaging about 12.6 miles a gallon. We had a team before that. And there's the conspiracy, well, it's probably somebody that's driven for you for 20 years. Actually, the people that won it, not this quarter, but the previous quarter, literally had a total of 9 months experience driving in our industry. So it's not always the experienced or vet that does it. It can be the team that literally just got into it. They happened to immigrate over from South Africa, did their training with us, got started, and literally their 6 months and 9 month mark, they averaged 12.4 miles a gallon. So they ended up splitting money because we can't split a car. There's some depreciation with that. And then whoever gets the best fuel economy for the year, we give $25,000. So as an example, we have a driver named Roberto Sandoval. He's won that 5 years out of his last 15. So that's an extra $125,000 without running in the extra miles. We do that, though, because it's where we can save money. It makes a significant difference in the long run of us being profitable and is paying off dividends in the current freight environment. Drivers are able to see where they are versus their competition, both in the truck. We communicate, hey, you're number 78 based off your fuel economy, along with suggestions and working with them. It's on the board in there. We also do safety bonuses. We do productivity bonuses depending on mileage and customers delivered to. But that recognition becomes important because at the end of the day, I don't care how grizzled you are and how tough-nosed you want to be. Every once in a while, we need a hug. From a recruiter standpoint, from the people that report to me and the processors, it sounds a little passé, but I'm a big thing on Employee of the Month and having that recognition and identifying who it is. We've had it be recruiters. We've had it be processors. 1 month, we had it be our shuttle driver. The big thing when I got here is I did not want it to be a popularity contest. So as an example, we let people vote on who the Employee of the Month is. I think it was the first month I hear. We had a recruiter that's not with us anymore, but she had like one hire for the month, never really answered her phone, and somehow one of my managers go, hey, this person's going to be voted Employee of the Month. No, she's not. No. And I'm having some criteria around it. And so now it's a big deal when somebody wins it. We've had a couple employees cry as they're getting presented it because it's not only did you have the support of your coworkers, but here are the metrics we show. You not only do your job, you excel at it. People like compliments, but they like when there's substance behind it. It's easy for me to look at my wife and go, oh, you look pretty. On the flip side, if I go to my wife and go, you know what? I had a long day yesterday and you got me through it. That second compliment means much more than the first compliment. It's the same thing as with coworkers. Having substance and meaning behind it means it. And then from a compensation standpoint, I'm a big believer that if the company is doing well, if you're doing well, somebody should get it. It doesn't have to be that you're trying to make somebody a multi-millionaire the next day. But it could be as little as, we're doing better here, and I want your paycheck to reflect that things are going really well right now. It sticks with people. You know, it's that conversation of the carrot or the stick. I'm not saying that the stick's never going to need to be pulled out, but that carrot tends to be something that you need 9 times more than you need that stick.
1,000% well said. And to that point, I'm a big believer with my company as well in tying everyone to the success of the company. And my first job out of college, I worked for a truck driver staffing agency. Everyone from the receptionist to the VP to the CEO was tied to the revenue of the business. I've never been a part of a more dynamic, hungry, collaborative team environment, and that was rare back then, and that's something that we do here at KJ, and something that I always tell my clients to do as well, because when you're able to tie people to the success of the company, it just is a different driver, it's a different motivator. I also really like what you said about within the company itself, everyone kind of knows their stats and where they're at, specifically like around the fuel economy. That type of transparency is key. And I couldn't agree with you more. If you're able to be really specific with the types of compliments that you are giving, that's going to go tenfold along the way. And they're really going to see the value. And then guess what? It also ties back to the revenue of the company and more profitability. So that is a win-win.
I think it's important from a communication standpoint. I've always said that when you do an annual employee review, there should be no surprises in that discussion. If you're giving an employee review and they seem shocked by something you've said, you failed from a communication standpoint in the previous 12 months. Mm-hmm. Literally, that's one of those things where each people should be nodding the whole conversation. Mm-hmm. It's important. If someone's doing well or someone's not doing well, you should be able to point to how they know that and that you've communicated to them. Because I can tell you the biggest failing I see from a lot of managers today is you'll have people that are doing really bad at their job, but think they're doing really good, and vice versa. People that are doing really good at their job, but are convinced that they're failing miserably. That is usually a failure of communication from a management standpoint. And eventually you might be able to fake it till you make it for a little bit, but eventually those roosters come home, or those hens come home to roost.
Yep. No, that is so true. And I have two final questions for you. I would love to know, in your experience in the industry, since, back when you were a little top, but, now as a VP of driver recruitment, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned in your overall career that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, empathy matters. You're gonna find people from all walks of life. There is no stereotypical driver. I know you may talk to somebody outside of our industry and they're thinking Smokey and the Bandit, right. But we come from all walks of life. Could not be more different. I see that continuing to diversify. Being able to have empathy for others and their perspective and what matters to them, be it your coworkers, and in particular ultimately my customer is the driver. So as I deal with the driver, and being able to have that empathy will make you a better recruiter. If you become jaded and biased and I got to get my 8 this week, you're going to become a horrible human being and you will burn out of the job very, very quickly. If you can have empathy, you're going to find the pleasures that the job and the industry have to offer.
Mm-hmm. Spot on. I absolutely love empathy. And that's actually, I've done dozens of interviews at this point. First time I've heard that one. So really appreciate that unique lesson that we're able to share with the audience, because empathy is key in everything that we do. Final question, Robert. Why should a truck driver consider a career with MVT?
Yeah. I'll say it this way, and it depends. There's a number of factors in that end, but it really comes down to if you're looking for a great set schedule, attractive running lanes, and quite frankly, a collaborative work environment. We have very close relationships between the recruiters, the fleet managers, the safety team, our shop. Everybody here is kind of involved in the same process, where a lot of companies, you may have silos and you have a driver and you have an office person and an admin. We're part of the same collaborative unit here, and it separates us from a lot of those things. A lot of companies will talk about open door policies, or you can talk to any of the board members, yet all their doors are magically locked. Literally, we are very hands-on with everybody involved in the company. It's extremely collaborative. And the nice thing with us, we run point A, point B, point C, point A. It allows us to know, hey, when I tell you you're going to average $1,800 a week, I'm within $100 plus or minus on that because of the nature of the job that we do. It's the nice thing compared to dedicated that if you don't like one of the customers we work with, there's 18 others that make up that list. You probably won't see a lot of them. And on the flip side of it, too, you can trust your coworkers in that collaborative environment. We're one of the few companies out there that if you look at the 7 CSA categories, we have 0 over threshold. We have no safety issues whatsoever. So it allows us to get into direct customer freight instead of relying on the spot market. And it allows you to know that you can trust your coworkers. And that's really important right now. It's one of my responsibilities. If I hire the wrong driver and they come in and screw things up, it's costing 40 other drivers their next load. There's a consequence to that based off of those factors in this present environment. So when you come in and you join MVT, you can stand sure that your coworkers are an asset to your career endeavors compared to being a liability. There's about 80 other reasons that I could keep on going, but I don't believe you want to be on with me for the next 3 hours. But absolutely, they should reach out to us at drive4mvt.com. That's the word drive, the number 4mvt.com, and we'd be glad to talk to anybody.
Well, fantastic. We're going to have a link to drive4mvt.com in the show notes, as well as how to get in contact with Robert and his team over there and all the excellent work that they're doing. Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us today. It was a blast to have you on the show, and I feel like, honestly, you and I could probably go for another 3 to 4 hours. But we'll probably have to come back because there's a lot of layers to unpack here. And thank you for our listeners for tuning in. Remember, the road to success begins with effective recruitment, thoughtful retention, and genuine recognition. Feel free to share this knowledge with your peers and industry colleagues. Your sharing can make a difference, and together we can empower the industry to thrive. Until next time, thank you all.